when you're doing flowers, depending on the kind of flower, basically for every petal you'll have a ball of clay. So if I was doing a rose, I would start out by creating a bunch of balls of clay that are roughly the same size. And they could vary also. You could have large to small because maybe you want the petal size to change. But that's where I kind of start, is making a few balls of clay from pretty soft clay. So if you dig out or cut off a piece of clay from your bag and it feels a little stiff to push, then get your hands wet and work a little bit of water to soften that clay, okay? But each petal totally depends on the flower that you're doing. I'll start with a rose because quite frankly, that's the easiest. And I put that ball of clay on a piece of plastic, fold over that plastic just enough that there's some space around that ball of clay, and then I'm gonna press it out, just making a little pancake. And on one side of the petal, I'm going to press that edge to sort of flatten it out. And the other side I'm not worried about because that's going to be the interior of the petal. And then I'm going to open up that plastic, and my plastic was a little wet, so it might stick and make a mess this first time, but I peel it carefully off. And now I have a nice-ish, soft, thin edge, but the petal itself is not as thin as the edge is. That's important because I don't want this to be super fragile and I don't want it to dry super fast. So having a little bit of thickness in the middle, but pressing that edge. And then with a rose, I just roll up this petal to get my first interior swirl, okay? And you can, if you want sort of a natural looking, for me, I like natural looking roses. I don't like the perfect ones that are super hybridized. So I will sort of move the petal a little bit to make it unique. And then I'm gonna stand that up on itself. Can you guys see that on camera? I don't think you can, but I just stand it up on itself. Put that here, and then I'm gonna make another. I would not have my plastic wet normally. I just rinsed my fingers and it got a little bit wet. That would actually make it a little bit harder for peeling a petal off nicely. But I'm gonna press out this clay into a pancake. If I find that it's sort of stuck to the plastic and it won't let me push it, you can peel that off and reset it, because sometimes it does sort of get stuck and it won't move anymore. And then again, I'm gonna smooth particularly over one edge to get a nice thin side. And I'm not worried about this side if it's a little thicker. And then I'm gonna overlap this petal over this one. I am not gonna meet the petal. So where this petal ends, I'm not gonna attach the other one. If I do that, I'm gonna end up with a thick petal over and over again and nothing over here. So instead I overlap it in the middle. And I wrap the petal. While I'm wrapping it, I'm actually sort of pinching the bottom a little bit to create some space between each one. And I just pinch the base together because my clay is very soft. It's the same thing over and over again. So again, big ball of clay, you're gonna get really big petals, which on a rose can be really nice, and making it is a little faster because you have such big petals. It'll cover a lot of the form of the flower. Oops, there we go. And then again, overlap. So overlap and a little bit of a pinch towards the base. And you can see the petals aren't perfect. Again, for me, I don't mind that because I like a more natural looking rose. And you see that I'm just sort of rolling in or rolling out a little bit the natural curves that would occur in a rose. Oops, a little more on camera for you guys. Okay, so that's the beginning kind of thing with a rose. And sometimes little bits of clay will stick on the plastic. Again, I can generally put that down towards the bottom, and these are kind of small, so I'm gonna go for a bigger petal. You can make the petal sort of oval also, which again will wrap around the flower a little bit better. So that one should be much larger. Too hard to do sitting down. So I actually learned how to do this when I was a wedding cake lady, because I would make marzipan roses for wedding cakes instead of those frosting ones. And the same exact technique works for marzipan and clay. So that's a nice bigger petal, and I'm doing it. So you might want to practice it a little bit, because what I do see a lot of students do is when they wrap the petals, they forget and they don't realize they've got to sort of pinch and crease down below, and that gives some gaps. And you can still get in there and move things for a little bit and get a nice natural looking flower. Back that up a little bit. Yeah, you can do kind of carved in, and actually that's what I was going to do when I pull the mask back over here, is you can do kind of combinations of things for some of the styles on your masks especially. So I'm going to put one more petal on this one. And again, you can do rose buds, you can have little teeny, you know, so you can show vines, sweet peas and viney kind of flowers for those of you who are doing those floral styles of masks. Are like just simply two of these, maybe two petals that you just kind of curve and bend and do your thing. And I'm just pinching and sort of helping the curve of the flowers, but not by putting my hand here. I don't have to stick my thumb in there and curve anything. I'm doing it all by the bottom of the clay. And then I do pinch it out. You can see I end up with excess clay in this, and so I will just cut that off. Where's a fettling knife? So a couple of things. You don't want to cut it off in a place where you have nothing to attach onto your mask or whatever surface. We do these on boxes and all kinds of other projects. So I leave a little bit of the thickness of the clay, and then I pinch it out. Carefully try not to smush my flower. And I pinch out that stem to create this little flange, this flare of clay, so that when I put it on a surface, like I'm going to put it on my mask, then I have something to grab hold of and blend, and I have more surface area here where I'm going to be attaching it onto the mask itself or any kind of surface. Okay, so that's just a rose, fairly straightforward. If you're doing something like a daffodil, so it has a center kind of cup to it. So for me, not that I'm an expert on daffodils, but just looking at what I've got in front of me, I'm going to do more of like a coil shape, but fairly large. Press this out a little bit. Put the plastic on there again so I can press through it. I use the side of my thumb. Seems to move the clay the best for me. You might decide it's your knuckle or the palm of your hand, but for me, I kind of like what I can do with the sides of my thumb. The inside of the daffodil, at least the ones that I'm looking at here in my little old school illustration book, have a bit of a ruffled edge. So I'm going to go along there and really press that thin. And in the end, this is going to end up being a cup shape. So I am going to use my fettling knife and kind of give myself sides that are going to come together. And then when I have a ruffly edge, you can see it's kind of smooth here, I just sort of pinch away and make a little bit of a ruffle that way. And I can use a little bit of water and soften and roll or smooth out and curve. can have it look more regular. You could cut it or use your bamboo skewer as your needle tool and kind of cut an edge that's ruffly and then come back with just a pinch of water and soften it. And then I'm going to bring this around. Again, all of this is with soft clay. This is something that you're going to do in one go. You're not going to walk away and do it later. So here I've got kind of the trumpet that's the inside of that particular kind of flower, and I'm just sort of pinching and bringing it together. So there's sort of a bell shape, which is also what foxgloves and blue delphiniums and all kinds of other flowers have. Daffodils also can sort of be bent open at the top. So again, just sort of soft clay and gently relaxing it back so it gets a little bit of a fluted edge. And then around it, it has very similar petals like a rose, only they have a pointed end, more teardrop shaped. So that's what my ball is going to be there. Has a little bit of a teardrop shape to it. And again, press that out. And I would probably make 6 or 7 of about the same size balls of clay so that I can just make them all fairly quickly. And they also have kind of a soft quality to them, and they get added right behind there. So slightly teardrop shaped. This is the same kind of method I would use to make feathers, leaves, all kinds of things. So if you're adding something to your piece that's a little natural and needs a little bit of something like that, then you can add. So I'm overlapping slightly. I just added a little bit of water on the surface of my fingers because even though this clay is relatively soft, I can just feel it's already getting a little bit drier for just sticking clay together instead of having to score and slip. So I'm just going to soften this clay up a little bit again, added a little water on my fingertips. And then that same thing over and over again, and hopefully you can start to see that daffodil shape kind of forming there. So, and even the same kind of thing, if you were doing something that had shells, same basic concept, you're just looking at the shell, because whether it's sort of a clam shell or a spiraled shell or kind of a mussel, something like that. So this guy overlaps just a bit, and he's starting to get a little daffodil-like right there. This one's pretty good size, again, kind of for the camera. So if you wanted to make it smaller, you certainly could. I got 2 more petals to go, and then that guy's done. Do that real quick. And then, so hopefully you're getting kind of the concept of flowers in general with these 2 pretty different styles of flowers. You can do 4-leaf clovers, and just like I said, leaves themselves. When I make roses, I always make some leaves to go with my roses. And again, I know some of you have masks that sort of have vines climbing up and around the mask, so you can make some of those petals, or excuse me, leaves that way. You would just do exactly the same thing, and it just stuck, and it's not the end of the world. I'm just gonna put my plastic back over and sort of soften that edge again. And another petal. And I just need 1 more because they are generally not for like a symmetrical that way. So there's my daffodil. And then again, on the underside, it all depends on what's really exposed. If you're laying it sideways on the side of something, then I need the underside to really be cleaned up and those petals to sort of make sense in the back. But if I'm setting it upright on a piece, then I don't have to worry too much about that. It's really more of if things are attached well enough, then that's my only real concern. And these guys also have stamens in the middle normally. Big open flowers, sometimes that's really important to do. So again, I'm gonna make a bit of a, whoops, do this without destroying it. A little bit of a flange on the underside so I have a good attachment point. Put that upright. And then if I wanted to make a couple of stamen that's in there, you could, if you're lucky enough to have like a old school garlic press at home that somebody will let you use, you can do that. But otherwise, I'm gonna just roll some really thin coils. Now the trick with this is to not let your clay dry out too much. So again, starting with a really soft clay to roll the super thin coil. You guys know I always talk about sort of earthworm size coils. This guy is gonna be an earthworm on a diet, pretty skinny. And I would say in clay, this is really difficult to do if you just wanted a single stamen or a single very thin piece that's gonna be out in space. That's really too fragile. People working in ceramics who are doing those kind of pieces generally have a wire that's inside that piece. So I'm gonna take it and I'm gonna have a cluster of little stamens. You guys remember pistons and stamens and all of that stuff? I've forgotten which is which at the moment. I'm gonna do a little collection of them here. And soften the ends. I know some of them have little ball ends or something that you could certainly do, especially if you're taking more time than I am when my slamming out demo kind of stuff. Again, I'm pinching the bottom so there's a little connection point. And with this, I'm gonna put a little water and on my freshly made flour, carefully sort of set that in there where I want it to be. And then get my bamboo skewer, and a little water in there, and I can get down in there and really press it in and adjust it. And get them to stand where I want them to be, and then do a little cleanup down on the inside. Wooden knife might work, but it also might be too big depending on the kind of flower that you're doing. So dropping a little bit of detail in there, which can be nice. And I could also kind of have these resting against the side. That's actually gonna give me the best chance of these not breaking or being too fragile when they're attached on the mask. Even though that may not be super realistic of having them touch the inside, it actually is realistic enough for me. And you have to think about the function and what clay can and can't do. So working within those limitations, okay? So a couple flowers there. Then how do you attach and what can you do on the surface of your mask? Switch all of this up. And we've got our mask. And say you want to have a combination of things sort of on the surface as well as three-dimensional flowers. So one thing is just going in and figuring out where things are going to lay. So if I wanted something to look like vines that were climbing up the side of the mask, figuring out where the vine is, whether that's going to be something that I add three-dimensionally onto the surface, large or small. That's not how I would add it, but just so you get a visual of what I'm talking about. And then also having, you know, you can draw in leaves and you can draw in other flowers. So if you want something that looks like a rose but isn't a three-dimensional rose, you can draw one onto the surface. My petal just got really weird. The nice thing is you can erase. Obviously, my clay is kicking up all kinds of little goobers on here, so I would spend some time cleaning that off. You guys have a clean out tool at home, so I would definitely get in there and do some cleanup and make some nice channels where color can go when we get to putting your underglaze color on here, so you can clean all of this up and get rid of all of those little goobers of clay that are so annoying. You can also get in there and use this tool to create all kinds of textures. So if you want to texture your leaves, rose leaves tend to have little jagged edges, so you can do all that kind of stuff, or not. So I would probably do, and I know some of you guys have that as your concept of having some of the things drawn into the surface of your piece. So if I'm going to town and putting leaves everywhere. And then what can be interesting is if you have a leaf that you've made, kind of do it without plastic-ish. So you could have the combination of both going on the surface. So if I make a rough leaf here, it's not as good because I'm not using plastic. I'm going to soften those edges up a little bit with water, because again, you know that your teacher hates it when you attach things that look like big old sugar cookie shapes that you stick on your pieces because you did not think about the edge being way too thick and you didn't just take a minute and pinch it out. So I could take a leaf like this and leaves that I have drawn, and I can do combinations of the two on the surface. So some are drawn in and some are three-dimensional, like that one. Okay, and then same kind of thing, attaching my rose. Maybe I want some, this is really big and tall for this, but some that are drawn in almost like a tattoo on the surface of the face, and then others where you're gonna score, unscore, and add your water and make that into slip. And then I'm gonna press this on here. And what I normally do in order to get a good attachment, because that is not well attached, I just set it there and it was wet enough that it stuck, is with wooden knife or with bamboo skewer, you can actually go down on the inside of the flower and kind of press a little bit without destroying anything and without that showing in the end. But underneath here, hopefully you can see where that flange is. I'm going to get in there and blend all of that down and make sure it's well attached. Now again, right now, that's really sticking off that head. Whoops, let's see if I can hold it that way. There's a big gap between that flower and the mask. So one is you can cut the flower so you're actually cutting the bottom off so that it attaches. But that's where, for me, I've always used the leaves, is I go underneath and I would actually attach the leaf there, and it will start to fill in that gap. So visually it doesn't feel like you just have a flower sort of stuck on, but you start building either another cluster of flowers or some leaves to sort of soften that and make this blend and work on top of the mask instead of looking stuck on. The newspaper from the inside. So this is also, these are good things to think about. If I'm adding flowers like this, I'm not gonna then turn this guy over and clean this out, because that's what just happened to my flower.